I'll volunteer a question.
All
What is
right,
your
Jess.
favorite thing about coding?
Oh, I'm kind of a data geek. I find that when I sit with a spreadsheet and I'm just fast. I mean, I just go in a deep dive and, 2 hours later I'll look up. So, I don't know if that's a favorite thing, but that is what happens to me. Uh, so it doesn't seem to get old. And, and I find that I'm the first person to volunteer to try to make something into a spreadsheet so I can treat it like data. uh, yeah, and unfortunately, both of my children have inherited this fault. So yeah, so I don't know. That's a nice question to have asked. Jess, thanks.
We were all saying in class earlier that we wish there was just a class devoted exclusively to learning Excel.
Ah, yes, I can understand that. Uh, I'm all subs out in Excel, so I can tell the story that when I first started using spreadsheets, which wasn't Excel, and Krista can empathize with this. It was in the early days of the internet too, and I don't know if this had any, but anyway, it would recalculate every time you hit the return. And so when I would code something and hit the return, I would get up and walk down the hallway and then come back because it would take that long to be ready to take the next piece, So things have gotten better. And we don't really use Excel as a calculator so much as a database. And it's probably not, if there's a lot better database programs out there, probably easier to use. It's just that this is the one that I figured out a lot of workarounds to get it to do what we want to do, which is, I think, the most valuable part of the book is learning those workarounds and getting those formulas. But there's a lot of the qualitative data programs, and we've added that into the new book. So and they do a lot nicer things, I think, than Excel, but Excel is a good starting place, I think, for understanding what you're doing. Make sure I'm not leaving anyone out here. Everybody's in. Okay, it's 9 o'clock. Shall I start and we'll just let people go in? Okay. Okay, I think I'm going to switch to the slides. Share my screen with you and give you some sense of our agenda today. I'll set you up so I can see all of you. No, I don't want to do it that way. There we go. Let's see. Chris comes right at the end. Do you see when somebody's waiting? I can't remember whether you do.
No, I don't.
Okay, all right. I will just try to be diligent and see that. All right, so we're going to talk about how to code language reliably. And, I think this may be the first time I've done more or less the same kind of workshop, same topic at the same place. How many years ago did I do this, Krista?
I don't know, because that was when Jonathan Buell was the vice chair. So
yeah, and you I think you were away, right? Or out on leave or something?
I'm not sure. I can't even remember.
Yeah, you weren't around. I remember that. Yeah, but anyway, it was a while ago. And I was there in person. Yeah, it must be at least 4 or 5 years ago, I think. Anyway, so that's new for me. But so I'm just going to give you some kind of opening remarks. kind of to see where I'm coming from. And those of you in Krista's class may know a lot of these sort of history of my publication on coding verbal data. But you know, I did my first book on this in 2004, which is a nice slim little book. Now it's a little bit bigger book, although it's also not really in print. I mean, you can get a print copy, but most people work with it online. I've been doing a seminar at Dartmouth, a research method seminar since 2011. So we're coming up on 11 years now, or 10, 11 years now. Where we go into this in greater depth, of course. And when I was at RP, I also taught a verbal data course, and that's where I really started on all of this. But more recently, I think, you know, if you wanted to dig into sort of the philosophy or the theory behind the approach that I'm taking, I would look at that written communication article that I did in April of 2018. Although I think I do cover a lot of that same stuff spread out over in the book, particularly chapter 1. So today I'm going to just give you a little bit of background, and then we're going to launch into the workshop. And I sent out, and those of you who I don't know about don't have the task directions. So I will see if I can remind me, Luke, and whoever, what was it, Luke, Morgan, and Elizabeth, to send you the task directions when we do our first breakout group. So we're going to do mostly workshop work today. Then I'm going to sort of talk about where you would go if you wanted to go further with this. And then we will spend as much time as we have left sort of looking up at the larger issues that tend to come up, and maybe some of the questions that you'll still have. Yeah, so I've long believed that you shouldn't be critiquing something until you know how to do it, or at least have tried to do it. So that's my assumption here. I'm not trying to get you to do it this way. I'm trying to show you how to do it this way. Then you're in a better position to make a decision for yourself. So we will reserve that theoretical discussion to the end of the workshop. And I've already pointed you to the places where I've written more about that. So just some background and some way of thinking about things. So when I talk about verbal data, I mean, there's so much verbal data out there, but some of the characteristics that I consider sort of fundamental and that shape the analytic process is, I think of language as a stream. And by that, I mean, it occurs over time. It's not a static thing. It's not something that occupies space. It's something that occupies time. Even that which is written down is read through time, is experienced through time. And certainly oral language is experienced through time. Therefore, your analysis has to work over time. Second thing I think characterize verbal data that are really important, and I think distinguish a kind of rhetorical approach from other approaches to analysis, is that we understand that a language doesn't just mean things, it also does things in the world. And so you can code a lot of many methodologies for what I would consider more simplistic coding are just looking for meaning, looking for certain, recurrent words. But I think if you're looking to understand what the language does, you are digging in deeper to understand how the language works in the world. And along with that, I think the meaning that you get and the understanding, that interpretation that you do has to be meaningful only in context. You can't pick a phrase or a word out and code it just because it has, without considering what went on around it, what questions were asked, what was going on, what the interaction was. So I guess another way to say it is there's an interactive context for all language that you really have to understand before you can code it effectively. And of course, there's all kinds of verbal data. There's text and talk and transcriptions and online interactions and things I haven't even thought about. Never had anybody with access and coding transcripts of all the talk shows and all the, all the so-called spontaneous stuff that's going on, both on air and online, but that also, of course, has lots of text to go with it. A few years ago, when I started thinking about this, I wondered how much coding was actually getting done in writing research. And so I looked at 4 journals: Written Communication, JB, TCQ, and the Journal of Writing Research, and looked for articles that were using coding. And I had a fairly loose definition of coding. That is, it meant putting language into categories. So using some kind of categorization scheme. And you can see the range was from 67% in written communication in the 2 years, 2015 and 2016, to a low of 25% in JVTC, but 25% is still pretty high. Overall average was 44. So it is a very common technique, but even though it's a pretty common, it's not talked about much. And maybe I shouldn't say that anymore because I'm talking about it a lot, and that might have had an impact on the field. When I started doing this, when I started wanting to code something, what they said was, go code this. And that was all the direction I had. And so there's a lot of good books out there on coding especially from a qualitative point of view. And then of course, the technique that I take is more of a mixed methods, qualitative and quantitative. But anyway, it's always been important in my sort of intellectual history to uncover hidden processes and make sort of reveal cultural capital that that otherwise doesn't get only gets passed on person to person. Coding, the book really has 3 major parts to it. The first part we're going to look at closely today, or at least part of it, which begins with designing your analysis, segmenting, coding, and second coding, all of which is to get data coded. And then once you've coded it, then you want to analyze the patterns that you see, in which we are not talking about, but chapters 6, 7, and 8 cover. And then 9 and 10 have to deal with, okay, I see these patterns. How significant are they? How do I detail them and make their meaning clear to a reader? So our focus is on that process of second coding today. And you see Kira coded. You've been second coders, most of you. We are going to check intercoder agreement, and we are going to use that analysis of intercoder agreement to revise Kira's coding scheme, or at least make some stabs at it. So that is the process of second coding that I want to introduce to you. And why do that? I think actually, I just had someone write to me this morning and say, I don't think anyone's going to be able to code my data but me. And I wrote back and I said, well, if that's the case, when you write it up, how in the world will they know what you're talking about? If they don't know what your codes mean. I think what the goal that I've been working for is to get a coding scheme that's clear enough for someone else to understand and use it. So, there are ways of dealing with situations where that's not possible, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But what we're looking at today is where we're going to try to do that. If you do that, I think one of the major benefits is that you actually come to better understand what you were thinking. It's not a static thing. Almost everyone I have worked with discovers that they don't really know what they're talking about as they work with a second coder to more or less some degree. So it is a marvelous way to get clarity about your own thinking. Of course, and then when you publish your results, your readers can have confidence that in your categories, and someone else like you who might come later and build on work can have some kind of something other than quicksand to stand upon and move that the work forward. I think of coding as managing intuition rather than replacing it. Some people don't like coding because it supposedly gets rid of your intuitive understanding of languages and replaces it with something sort of mechanistic. But I actually think of it as sort of managing intuition. So if your coding definition matches intuition, then you will be able to have a reliable coding scheme that people agree on. But if you create coding definitions that violate intuitions, you will never get it to be reliable, no matter how much you berate your second coder into trying to do what you're saying. And I've got a funny example here. Suppose we have a two-category coding scheme. One code is dog, every mention of a mammal that barks. Kind of makes sense. Second one is code is aquatic, every mention of a mammal that swims. So let's code these examples. What is this? Eduardo, what do you think that is?
I believe that's a dog.
Okay, and why do you think that?
It barks.
You think it barks? Okay, he's not barking right now, but okay. All right. What about this, Liliana?
I think it's aquatic because it swims.
Okay, and how do you know it's a swimmer?
It's got flippers, and I've seen it in the water too.
Okay, you've seen guys like this before. Okay, they swim quite frequently around here, up in off of our coast. Luke, what about this guy?
That's tough because they kind of make a barking sound, but they also swim. So that's where it gets tricky. Right.
So if I force you to call him one or the other thing, what would you probably call him? Do you have a?
If I was forced to, I would probably say aquatic, just because I myself associate seals more with their aquatic environment than their barking.
Right. Now, so if you have a coding scheme that's like this and you have seals in your data, you are going to have trouble because it's something that you haven't considered. So I'd probably want to revise one or the other of these coding definitions to take into consideration aquatic mammals that bark. And what about this one? Let's see. We'll take Jess. What about this?
I think I would seriously think about my coding scheme at this point. But if I had to choose one, I'd probably follow a similar logic to Luke's. I'd probably choose dog because even though this is an exception to the rule, the intuition is to associate dog with barking more
Right,
than with
right,
swimming.
right. Yeah. And so if I have a coding scheme that forces you to call that aquatic, or forces you to call the seal a dog, you are never going to get reliable judgments. No, even if I write code is aquatic, every mention of mammal that swims, even the animals that don't usually swim, you're still not going to want to call that fourth picture an aquatic. You're going to find that people want to call it a dog. So that's what I mean when I talk about managing intuition. You're not replacing it. We had a lot of intuition here that we relied on in order to make the judgments that we made. And the coding definitions guide or manage that intuition, but they don't replace it. It's important, I think, to acknowledge the limits of this agreement and intuition. In some verbal phenomena, the context of production, which is that little gray circle, can be pretty close to the context of interpretation. That is, most people could understand what's going on if they looked at or listened to or read the verbal data. But there are other situations where it is so context dependent that the limits of the limits of interpretation are really pretty far out. If, for instance, you're sitting in, the first time I really sort of dealt with this, if you're sitting in with a student team in engineering, and they're working on a design, and they are working on it for 14 weeks intensively, and you walk into that room, week 13, you are not going to know what the world they're talking about, because they're going to be using all kinds of shorthand references to design features you don't know about, and so on and so forth. If you'd been there from the beginning, if you'd been a participant observer, you would know. But having somebody come in from the outside and code that, let's say, team interaction for week 13 is just not going to be possible because there's too much context dependent. Another example of where this happens that I run into Dartmouth every year is, if it's in a different language, you can't interpret it, so normally we serve as each other's coders at Dartmouth, but in some cases people are bringing me data in Spanish or in Italian or whatever, and they have to go and find a different second coder back home, if you will, because we do not have the ability to code outside of our own language, the languages we understand. Okay, so this is just to remind you, those of you who've done the homework will recognize this data. This is Kiera's data. It is set up the way I just tend to set up a spreadsheet for coding with a column for what the data that's being coded, the text that's being coded, where it's from. I try to give a unique number to every piece. So if I've got something out of context, I'd be able to find it again by its number. And then of course, a column for the code that you assigned. Kara was doing this a little bit, but Kara, could you talk a little bit about this data?
Sure. So as Eduardo noticed earlier, this survey data is from a survey that I was distributing from September through the end of January for my dissertation. So the broader study that this is part of is looking at what kinds of prior knowledge teachers of first-year composition assume students will bring into the classroom, and then also what knowledge from that classroom or prior they're going to take forward. So the two questions that you coded a sample of ask teachers what they expect students to already know and what they hope that they'll take out of the class. So do you want me to say more about other bits of data?
No,
or-
I think that's fine.
Okay.
Just so in terms of why are you interested in this? I guess we could maybe say one more thing about that.
Yeah, so I'm interested in this because I have like two abiding personal interest research areas. So one is teaching for transfer, which is all about practices that we can adopt as instructors to help students use what we're teaching them and also what they already know from being humans in our classes and in other classes. And I'm also really interested in culturally relevant, culturally sustaining, and culturally revitalizing pedagogies. So I'm working in the dissertation on kind of combining those two into an analytic that helps us to teach for transfer in ways that actually pay attention to culture, because that isn't really happening yet in that scholarship.
Very interesting. So I'll say this more than once today, and I've already said it, I think, in emails. Kira, the only reward Kira gets for doing this is if you send her, your coded data so she can see, how you agreed and disagreed with her initial coding. And if you send her your revisions of her coding scheme that you'll produce in class today. So you probably all know how to reach her anyway, but that is her email address. So please make sure you end the workshop time by doing that. So what is intercoder agreement? It's the extent to which two raters agree on how they place data in the categories of a coding scheme. It's usually expressed in terms of a percentage, 100% agreement, 0% agreement, which I've never seen. And it reflects a degree of consistency. And so I could code data from day to day and I can check, am I agreeing with myself, or week to week, or maybe I've come back, months later and do I still agree with myself, or I can check from coder to coder, do I still agree? Intercoder agreement is often talked about as reliability, and there are two measures of reliability, or two kinds of measures of reliability. The simple one, which is what we're going to work with today, talked about in terms of percentage agreement. The corrected reliability, and Cohen's kappa is the method for correction that's usually used in our field, but there are those we talk about in the book, tries to take account the expected agreement that would occur by random chance. If you have a 10 category system, the chances of you are making the same two people making the same assignment are not very high, 1 in 10. If you have a 2 category scheme, the chances of your making just by chance the same assignment are pretty high, 50% for each one. So there are methods then for taking into account the number of categories that you have and how often you use the categories. And I think it's very useful, although we don't cover it here, if you do go on and do this kind of intercoder analysis to calculate something like Cohen's kappa. And I just wanted to give us an example of how this can work. So suppose I have given you data here, but there is no data, but I'm asking you to code it anyway. Get a piece of paper, scrap paper, or you can do this in a scratch sheet online if you want. And number 1 to 10 and code, this is either technical or expressive. So there's 2 categories, technical, expressive. So take a minute here, write 1 to 10 down and code. You got your coding done? Okay, Morgan's still working, I think. It's a tough job, isn't it? All right, so now I'm going to show you the true coding, and I want you to count the number of times you agreed with me. Did you count? Everybody got a count? Okay, so anyone get 100% agree with me? Raise your hands for this. 90? 90%? You agree with me 90% of the time? Did you cheat, Morgan? Okay, that's pretty high. All right. 80? 70? 170? Okay. 60? 50? 50? 40? 30? We got a 30 there. 20? 10? 0? Luke, did you give me a number?
I'm
Shalina?
still
Still
counting.
counting? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm also stuck. I'm actually confused about where the data is. Sorry.
Oh, there is no data. It's just,
Oh, okay.
we're imagining we have data.
Oh,
Kira, what
okay.
did you have? Did you have?
I had 70.
70. Okay. Okay. So I'm just shocked that was it Morgan that had 90% agreement with me with no data. But that will indicate I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen 90% before, but it happens, right? If you have enough people do this, you will find that there's one person out there that agrees with when there's no, just totally by chance, 90% of the time. Normally it's somewhere between 40 to 60 where most people find, but that's a lot of agreement that has nothing to do with the quality of your coding scheme. This is one of the reasons you try to not to have a 2-category coding scheme. But this is the kind of random agreement that something like Cohen's kappa tries to calculate. So basically it takes your percentage agreement, let's say 70%, and subtract some number from that to get your corrected agreement given the random chance. All right. Any questions or comments so far before we actually go into the workshop? Okay, I appreciate those of you who keep your camera on, because that way I can kind of see how it's going for you. So if you can do that. All right, so we're going to talk about the workshop. So does everyone, I know, let's see, who is it that doesn't have the task directions? And how am I going to get them to them? Krista, do you have a way to do that?
I was going to say Krista forwarded it. Yeah.
I forwarded them. Everybody here has them, I believe.
Oh, good. Okay. Because I was going to say I don't have your emails either. All right. So all of you have task directions. They should look, well, is that right? Everybody know what I'm talking about? Okay, because I'm going to put you in breakout groups some of the time, and you won't be able to see, what I presented on the main slides at that point. So we're going to go through the process of checking item by item agreement, calculating a reliability score, and then using that to diagnose disagreements and revise the coding scheme. So that's the process. And I'm going to try to break you out for 2 of the 4 tasks. And I will drop into each of the breakout groups to deal with that. Yeah, that way you can help each other get this done. All right, let's talk about checking item by item agreement. So the first thing we want to do is find Kira's coding. And I'm actually going to show you this video, partly because I want you to see the YouTube videos that are up there as a resource for you. And so I am going to stop sharing this and go to sharing. Where is it? Oh, here. No. Sorry, I gotta do something different here. Here we go. Can you all see? I think I'm just going to keep it small. I think you'll be able to. If it doesn't work for you, tell me. Wave at me or something if it seems too small. Coding streams of language. Today, we're looking at Excel procedure 5.2, putting the two codings side by side for Excel data. Here, we'll be working in Excel with data that has been coded by a second coder. We want to compare her coding decision to those made by the first coder. The first coder's decisions are in the hidden column to the left of the second coding column. I begin by selecting the columns on either side of the hidden column. I then choose the columns unhide command under the Format menu. The hidden column is revealed. To learn more, all right, so you have a hidden column. In fact, you have two hidden columns. So if you open your data now, I will walk you through and we'll do this together so you can begin to see how your coding compares. So everybody have their worksheet open? Okay, so we begin by selecting, you want to select column C to F. So everyone know how to do that? Okay. Then go up under that Format menu column and select Unhide. I always think there must be an easier way to do this, but yeah.
I was able to literally just click on the lines between
and then say Unhide or just
drag them. Like
okay, I can do that.
Yeah.
I'm unsure where like the format like area
so on your
is.
Excel on the larger menu bar, you might also be able to right click to get it.
Yeah, I was able, I just like clicked on like the top where it says F and then dragged to C and then right click.
Yeah, that's what I just was able to do now.
Okay. All right. So hopefully is there anyone that can't see the two columns D and E now? Okay, I'm going to assume that means maybe you can. Okay. All right. So now you're in a position to compare Kiera's coding to your coding. In all the years that I've been doing this, I've never had anyone cheat and uncover the coding, but I'm waiting for the first day. So anybody, if you did that, don't tell me about it. Okay, so we're going to go on now. We're in a position to compare them. To check agreement, I've given you this link to this video to check agreement. I think I'm not going to show the videos. Oh, wait a minute, you're not seeing my slides anymore, are you? I gotta unstop share. That's why I don't want to do this anymore. I lose track of where I am. Okay. I think the point I want to make sure you understand is that there are YouTube videos for almost everything. They're very short. to the point, but it's very hard to demonstrate something that's in motion, through stills. So they're out there, and I encourage you to use them. But I will walk you through the rest of what we're going to do. All right, so to check agreement, you want to go to that worksheet again. So, oops. What is going on here? Oh, wait a minute, that's it. Okay, so I want to show you what's in here. I'm sorry, I got off the wrong slide. So in that column labeled agreement, if you put your cursor on that D, probably D3 or D2. Yeah, it's in E2 and D2. It will say something like this formula in the formula bar. So I don't expect you to be able to write this formula off the bat, but I want to explain to you what it does. It says if F and E, actually it says F and G, but pretend it says E and F. I thought I fixed that. E and F are match if they're the same. If they're equal, put a 1. If they're not, put a 0. So those 1s and 0s, 1s represent agreements and 0s represent disagreements. Now there's always a chance, if you're doing this the first time, that somebody, if you left off the S in students or did a mistyping, that something would show up as a disagreement, which wasn't really. But by having that drop-down menu that you used when you coded, we hopefully have eliminated that. So what we're going to do now is really basically look at the pattern of agreement and disagreements and we're going to use a pivot table to do that. Has anyone here ever used a pivot table? Ah, Krista, I'm impressed. Okay.
I was just extolling the virtues of a pivot table earlier.
Well, you may know more about them than I do. I'm always, struggling with them. Did Kira, was that your hand up as well? What have you used them for?
Lots of things. Researching cat food, real work, Okay.
All right, so this is probably looks a little bit different than the cat food example, but let me walk you through how to read this. Basically, Kira's codes, or the first coder's codes, are listed across that Kira used are listed across in the columns, and then down the side are your codes, the second coder column. And in between here are the pattern of agreement or in disagreements. So on the diagonal, which doesn't come in yellow, but I like to highlight in the yellow so I can see it, are the agreements. So 29 times Kira said information literacy, and I said information literacy. So you would like to see everything on this diagonal if you were 100% in agreement. So anything off diagonal are disagreements. And your goal and what you're going to use the pivot table is to try to revise the coding scheme to move some of these major off diagonal disagreements toward agreement. So this is very, if you didn't use a pivot table at all, you didn't look at the pattern of agreements and disagreements, you might just start out with the first one where you disagreed in your data and then try to figure that out. But that might not be the biggest problem. This helps you to see where your big disagreements are. This also is an important number to pay attention to. It's the total number of decisions that you made. So that's really the total number of lines of data that you coded. And when you make your pivot table, which you'll do in a minute, you can check to see whether it makes sense as a pivot table. Did you succeed by making sure that your grand total here is the right number, 223. If it's not, then probably there has to be, you might have to start over again, which is not unusual. I am going to put you in breakout groups to do so that you can help each other, and I'll drop in. But let's talk about how to read this pivot table just to make sure we understand it. So here, reading down, Kira said prior knowledge is too unpredictable. 13 times that I agreed with her. Here, she said student agency 14 times, and I said rhetorical knowledge 14 times. So that's a pretty high number of disagreements. What about this one? Let's see, who haven't I picked on yet? Angel. What does that 16 represent?
1 second. Students lack appropriately correct or advanced prior knowledge. So that means you, oh wait, no, 16 is rhetorical knowledge. Someone said rhetorical knowledge 16 times and someone else said students lack appropriate.
Right. So across here is Kira. So Kira said,
Kira said rhetorical knowledge then.
16 times, and I, no, she said students, lack of appropriate, correct or advanced.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and I said rhetorical knowledge. And if you, so, and notice that here I have 2 times when there's a high number of disagreements and I'm choosing rhetorical knowledge, right? So there's something going on with that definition there. I'm using it a lot more than Kira did. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to show you how to make a pivot table, and then I'm going to put you in breakout groups to make one for your own data. So you begin by going to the data to code. You select these 3 columns. You have to get the 2 coding columns and the agreement column. Then there's a couple of different ways to find the pivot table command, but the easiest way may be to go under the insert ribbon, in the insert ribbon, and all the way to the left anyway, under tables, or you may see it, is pivot table, and you click on pivot table. It will pop up with this menu, and you can just use these defaults. It's going to use the data you've selected and put it in a new worksheet. And then you will go to that worksheet and it will look like this. So the pivot table isn't showing up yet. It will show up here. There's some things we have to do over here, which is where people usually get lost. So I've made it a second slide to show that. And so we look at the pivot table fields. These are the 3 columns. And you're going to drag each one down into one of these boxes. So you want to put Kira's coding into drag that down into the columns field. And you want to drag my coding into the rows field. And then you want to drag agreement down to the values field, and it comes up as a sum of agreement. And you see this little I here? That, if you click on it, you will get this pop-up menu where you can say, I don't want sum, I want count. And you do want count. If you do a sum, your pivot table will look really weird and it won't tell you what you want to do. So you have to be counting here. So you click count, and then it becomes count of agreement, and you say, okay. And once you've done that, up pops your pivot table. And you can see it's kind of big and spread out. So you're actually going to have to scroll over to see the last column. And that's where you check that 223, that your grand total, to make sure your pivot table is working. So that's how to make a pivot table. So I am going to now break you out into groups, and then I'll drop by. And so everybody, the goal here is to get everybody to have a pivot table. And let me stop sharing to make the groups. Okay, so I have to compliment you. We had no problems making these pivot tables. It's either I'm getting clearer, it's getting easier, or you guys are just really smart or Excel savvy, maybe I should say that. All right, so let's talk about how to use this pivot table now. I'll share my screen again. So you'll get something like this, and this is the agreement between Kiera and I when I did it. And so the first thing you want to really know is how many times, what's your simple reliability. And what you do is you add together the numbers that are on the diagonal. Those are your agreements. So I'm going to add up 29 and 13, 61, 12, 24, and 23, which gives me 162. And that's 162 agreements out of a potential 223, which is 73%. So take a minute now and add yours up, because I want to see how we're doing in terms of levels of agreement. When you get your agreement, you can just call it out to me.
Mine is 60%.
60, okay.
Mine was 57%.
Okay.
I have 61%.
61, okay.
Krista, I think you were muted.
I got 62. Thanks, Lily.
62, okay.
I got 67.
67, okay.
I got 30%.
30, okay. Interesting.
I got 68%.
Do we have one more? Or is that everybody? I think that might be everybody. Yeah, because Kiera doesn't have a percent. She agreed with her. Well, actually, she might not agree with herself 100%. But we didn't ask her to check that. Yeah, right. All right. So in terms of, okay, so if you're Kiera, you're hearing these numbers and you're saying, oh, now, what does that mean for me? How am I doing? So there are really no standards, fixed standards for what percentage you should give. And I tend to go about like this. Anything 80% above is good agreement. Some people say 85, something in the 80s. If you're, I've seen publications that go, you know, as low as into the mid 70s and still publish. But you have to realize that means 25% of the data, you know, you disagreed about. So that seems a high percentage to me. If you're in the 60s, as we mostly are, a little high 50s, you are actually doing pretty good. I would be happy with that as the first pass, because you're probably, that means there's a lot of inherent agreement, and just a little bit of work, I think, would bring you up to a good place. If you're in, if everybody was it Angel that you had 30%?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I corrected that. I forgot a big number. So.
Oh, what was it? What is your percentage?
It was actually 60%.
Oh, okay, okay. Good, that makes me feel better. And you notice how everybody's kind of clustering around the same, you know, in the same area, which is also indicating that that Kira's coding team is intuitively, it's meshing with a lot of your intuitions here. So it's in a pretty good place. But there's still work that should be done, I guess I would say, before you would ever publish this. So let's go on and talk about doing that. Before we do that, though, are there any questions or comments about? Okay. So we use the pivot table to diagnose the disagreements, to find the major disagreements, and then to begin the process of trying to revise. Why do you diagnose at this point? This pivot table helps you to focus. I mean, if we go back and look at that, my pivot table, I'm going to look at this 14 and 16 probably. I'm not going to look over here where I've got only 3 and 1s, but if I didn't have this pivot table, I wouldn't know where to look, right? I mean, this is what tells me where my coding team is not managing coders' intuitions well. Oops, I guess I want to go one more thing. That pivot table helps you to focus your attention and, gives you a sense of how, sorry for that in the background. I have an open office in my house, no doors. The percentage, that percentage tells you, as we were just doing, how close or far are you from that? And I think Krista has a hand up. So Krista.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask, is it the coding schema that needs some attention, or could we ask a question about how the segmenting, what's the logic of segmenting, or are you planning?
Good question. Well, I don't spend a lot of time talking about that. Could you hold that until the end? Because it's a very good question.
Okay.
Because it can be the segmenting.
Okay.
And so, yeah. Okay. Don't forget to ask that again. All right. So you want to look for your major disagreements. And this is entirely different data, but real data. And where you can see that Robin said career, and I said other 11 times compared to 17 times of agreement. So that's pretty high. And here's another one where I said other and she said career, which is also pretty big. It's not as bad. I mean, we see 78. That's a lot of agreement there, but still, it's a high number in the overall number of disagreements. Everywhere else, we're seeing 1s and 2s. Also, I think it's useful to realize that there can be what I think of as a confusion here. So when Robin said reputation, I said almost anything but reputation, right? I mean, don't just look at cells, but look for patterns of across those cells where there just seems to be something going on. And there's another one here for research where, when Robin said research, I said, I agreed with her sometimes, but there's a lot of times when I'm not agreeing with her, and it's in it, but they're going every which way. So once you know those disagreements, you can do something with. So this is my data with Kira. And where do you think my major disagreements are? Where would you focus attention? Call out an answer here.
Probably that 14 and 16 under.
Okay. So with that code, and I want one more. I think I picked. I think I want to look at this one. So I don't know. I'm going to guess that most of your disagreements are over here too, but that could be totally wrong. But so I want to demonstrate with one where there's some disagreement between Kara and I, but not a lot. So I'm going to pick this one. So this one is, well, I guess I meant to pick that one, sorry. I said rhetorical knowledge and Kiera said rhetorical knowledge, and I said information literacy. Here, she said student agency, and I said a lot of things actually. But one of the things is I said rhetorical knowledge. And here she said lacking appropriate advanced prior knowledge. And I said information literacy. Notice how information literacy and rhetorical knowledge are coming up a lot here. So once you've picked a disagreement to focus on, then you can diagnose a disagreement. And then you go back to the data. So I'm going to show you how to do this, and then I'm going to give you a chance to do it. And you use a filter to find that disagreement. So we're going to look for times when Kiera said student agency and I said information literacy. Okay, so when you go back to the coding scheme, you can turn on a filter. You select the two, we want to select these two columns and filter them. And I see I've selected them here. And then under the data, on the data ribbon, there's this little filter. How many of you have used filters before? Anyone? Okay, some of you have, okay. So filters are kind of nice. They show you, you can pick what you want to look at. So I'm turning on the filter, and then these little pop-up arrows appear. And if I click on the one on Kiera's coding, it shows me all of the ones. First, they're all selected. So I click off select all, and I want to look at the student agencies, the times that she picked student agency. So I check that. And then I go over to my coding, and I want to check just the information literacy one for myself. And then we get the three pieces, because there were three of them. It's always nice when the number that appear after you do the filtering is the same number that was in your pivot table. I always like to check that, to make sure I've done it. So there were 3 times this disagreement showed up. Because you want to understand these disagreements in context, you can't really read this. If you look at this piece, for instance, it says "and informed," and you say, well, why did Kiera call it that and I call it that? You can't tell, right? I mean, there's just not enough information here to make any kind of sense of it. So you have to, I get around that by selecting this data and turning it red, putting it in a red font, and then turning off the filter. And then I can scroll down to find those red disagreements. So I've scrolled down to find this one. And now I think we can begin to understand what the disagreement is. So I'm going to ask you, I'm not going to put you in breakout groups to do this, to pick a disagreement and then filter for that disagreement in your coding scheme and turn that data red and then turn the filter off. And if you have an issue, just raise your hand and we'll share, but just go ahead and do that. If you need me to repeat something, just ask.
Yeah,
just wait.
I'm like stumped about what my first step is supposed to be. Can you show that
Look
again?
at your pivot table.
Okay.
Oops, sorry. And pick a disagreement. So pick one of the ones that was major for you and keep that in mind, and then go back to your data and filter for that disagreement. So ours was, Kiera said student agency, and I said critical thinking, information literacy. So I filter Kiera's column for, what did I just say, agency? And my coding column for information literacy. So that in the end, we get just the 3 pieces of data that had that disagreement. Notice nice zeros there, as it should be.
Could we see those steps behind the graph, possible?
Sure, I'll do it again. Actually, would you like me to do it in data? Because I have that open. Let me do that. Let me stop sharing this. New share. You're seeing this, right?
We're seeing your slides right now.
Yeah, it says new share. This is a new command to me. I don't know what that means, new share. Okay. See what this does.
Now we can see your Excel.
You can.
Yes.
This is a new a new Zoom command. Okay, I just have to get it out. Okay. So here's my pivot table, and I'm going to look for this one right here. Where is that? No, is that right? No, it was this one. Well, I don't even remember what it was. Doesn't matter. What I'm gonna look for one of them. So I select the 2 columns that I want to filter for, the 2 coding columns. And I go up under data here to get the data ribbon. Everybody see that? And then there's a filter, little filter. It says filter, it looks like a filter. Click on that. And then these drop down menus can appear. And you click off, you unclick select all, and then pick the one you want. So what was Kiara saying when you were saying something different? So it doesn't really matter for the purposes of demonstrating. So I'm going to say, I said rhetorical knowledge, okay? Or she said, I want to say, she said agency, let's say. And then I'm going to go, so now you see, I'm only seeing agency here. Okay, and then I'm going to say, look for mine, and I'm going to say, I want to look at where I said rhetorical knowledge, because I remember that was a big thing. And now you see, here are the disagreements. And there are however many. And then because I want to be able to find these disagreements again when I unfilter, I'm going to choose a different color font. I'm not going to choose red because I see I already have some red in here. I'm going to choose a different color. What shall I make it? Maybe, how about green? And then I can go back and turn my filter off. Then all I have to do is scroll down through here to find those disagreements. Now, and normally, as you're trying to revise a coding scheme, you'd look at all of them, but in a minute, I'm just going to show you how to with one of them. But anyway, they're all there. They're all marked in green. Here's one marked in red from before.
I was gonna ask, does it make sense, like as we're filtering, to also include the other categories that we also like? If we, so mine, Kira put rhetorical knowledge for it, and then, but then I put like information literacies, but then also a lot of social, cultural, and linguistic knowledge. And so when I filtered it, I filtered using both categories for mine.
There were major disagreements on both of those.
Yeah,
right.
Does that make sense?
I think
to do
what
that?
I would look at both, but I think I would do one at a time. Just
Okay.
Because it could be it's the same issue or it could be different, you know. And so looking at them first before you start revising, I would look at both, you know, but I would look at them one at a time. Other questions like that? Raise your hand if you've got your stuff filtered and colored. Angel's had a hand that I didn't see. Yeah, okay. All right, I think everybody has got it. Shalina, did I see your hand go up?
No, I'm still trying to filter. It's not getting highlighted, my filter options. I'm a bit like unsure.
Let's, I'm going to stop sharing and ask you to share your screen.
Okay, thanks.
So what are
Okay,
you, yeah, so you've got your filter on, I see. You've got those drop down menus. So click on that little arrow.
Okay. Sorry.
Now, it's like, and you know what you want to choose?
Yeah.
Okay. And then say, okay. And then go and do the next one. Click off, select all first. Or you can do them all of them. But
Oops.
so that's the one you want. Which one do you want?
This,
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
And there you go. And just make them a different color.
Yes.
Okay, you can stop sharing if you want. Well, you go ahead and do it. We'll make sure you've done it right.
Okay.
You have to go back home, I think. Yeah. You can make whatever color you like.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
All right. Okay. Now that is an example of an Excel kludge. I mean, that's probably the kludgiest kludge that I've come up with in order to recover the context for the disagreements. If you use a qualitative data analysis program, they have much, much neater ways to do that, but this works. So, okay, so back over to the slides. So once you've got your disagreements identified, then you can begin the process of trying to figure out what's, what could have done it and been the source of that. And I'm not going to do that. And revising the coding scheme. So I want to give you just a little bit of guidance on what a good coding scheme should look like, since you're going to be writing some. So this is an example of a coding definition for a study that I did. The study was looking using focus group data, focus groups, 2 of them with graduate students and 2 of them with graduate faculty who supervised graduate students. And I asked the question of the students, how did you pick your advisor? How did you pick the chair for your thesis? And I asked the faculty, how did you pick your students? And one of the categories of answers we came up with was by reputation. So here we have the category, reputation. And here we have the unit code as reputation any clause, which indicates how I've segmented the data. Code is reputation any clause in which the speaker refers to status or lack of status in the profession. So that is my overarching definition for reputation. But it goes on. I often find it's useful to have cases that are kind of separate instances. So here we have reputation may include instances where the speaker refers to someone's overall public profile, refers to documentation of overall profile, or refers to someone's being known within a network. So all of these cases come up as a way of resolving disagreements. So I remember clearly the day we realized that so if somebody said, I chose him because he had a great CV, I thought that was reputation, but my colleague didn't think it was reputation because it wasn't referring to their public profile, how well they were known. But obviously I thought we wanted to count things like that under the reputation code. So we added this case that documentation, and we also added examples, CVs, web pages, applications for grad school. So any of the paper or, you know, textual documentation of reputation, we want it to count as reputation. So these are the kinds of definitions that can evolve as you try to work through and resolve your disagreements. So here we have the student agency, that 3 disagreements, and Jess, there's, where are you? Yeah, has agreed to help me write some work on this to try to figure out. So Jess, we're just looking at one of the disagreements where Kiera said it was agency, I said it was information literacy. I'm going to read it out loud. You can, and you think about, what do you think is going on? Why did I think that, and why did Kiera think that? Okay, so I hope that they see themselves as writers with potential, that they feel they have strategies for moving through different kinds of writing situations. I hope they see writing as an option for reflection and revision, as something they can use to develop their thinking. Why do you think Kiera thought it was student agency?
Yeah, so I think in this scenario, it really has to do with the context that that last statement uses. So if the last 3 statements are taken into consideration, then the student agency confidence and growth mindset makes sense because it is related to how they view themselves and their potential as writers. Mm-hmm. But as we see the statement by itself isolated from context, it's more about developing their thinking, and then that would make more sense with the critical thinking and analytical skills.
So one of the things you have to kind of deal with coding and is, you know, is to try to code what's in front of you. That is, you know, you want to understand what that means in context, but what is this segment really referring to? So I think Jess, you're telling me that I thought it was, since it says thinking, I thought, well, it must be critical thinking. They're getting better at critical thinking. And you think it has to do with growth, right? Because it's been talking about growth. Although this one was rhetorical knowledge, actually, not growth. Mm-hmm. You do want to kind of try to stay with just because people can, you know, you segment data, and this may be getting back to Krista's with help. You segment data so that each one potentially could be different, but it could be that you get 2 in a row that are the same. I mean, or even 10 in a row, that's fine. As long as each one can be looked at and say, oh, yeah, that's agency. You know, I can tell there's enough in that, wherever I segmented it, it's enough to tell me. If you just look at this one, Jess, number 55, is there anything about growth in there?
No, I think that's kind of what I was saying. Like, if we look just at that segment, I think that seems to point more to the information literacy and critical thinking, because it's just related to the skill set itself.
Now, I remember feeling a little bit torn when I did this one because of that word develop. And I thought, oh, well, maybe there is some development here. You know, there is maybe a little evidence of growth, but I did think it was over time as I used this, if it had to do with thinking, I tended to put it in, you know, this information and critical thinking. I don't know if you did that as well.
Mm-hmm. I think one other thought that came to mind with this is how the definitions account for current knowledge or developing knowledge in the present versus like imagined acquired knowledge in the future. Because I think in this, like, I think I saw it in the chat too, like I think there is a sense where like this isn't really thinking that they have or that they've developed yet. So it's more about like the goal. But again, it's about like whether or not we take into account the context around it. So I think that can be tricky.
And Kira's coding scheme doesn't really distinguish between what do they think they already know versus what do they hope they will know. I mean, that's a really good example of how a coding scheme can be blind to some things. It's just saying, I don't care whether you're talking about what you expect them to already know or what you expect them to learn. I just want to know what kind of things you're looking for. If she really did care to make the distinction between, is this knowledge that they already attribute to them versus knowledge that, you know, they think they will come up with, she would need a different coding scheme. Okay, so it's not something that she has looked at, you know, with this coding scheme. Let's, I want to share, I want to ask you to help me to revise this now, so that well, I guess one thing we would say is we have a choice here, because we're pretending we're Kiera now, right? We see this disagreement. She can either think, oh, I really want that to count as agency, in which case she's going to have to figure out what is it in that segment that's going to cue that. Or she can say, oh, I think I was wrong. I really do think they were, you know, Cheryl was right. It is information literacy. And what can I do to make sure it gets coded that way? You know, so Jess, I'm going to just let you choose which way you want to go, you know, which one you think is the most appropriate. And I'm going to get into a Word file here so we can wordsmith this together.
Okay, sounds good.
No, that's the wrong one. You all can see that well enough? Is it big enough to see? Okay. All right. So we want to use that formula that I showed you earlier. Code as, oops.
Cheryl, I think the screen is showing it so large that we can't even see where you're typing right now.
Well, I was going to make that a little bigger. But maybe
or like,
it
looks like it's only capturing a corner of the Word document that maybe you've opened.
Can you see that now? Is it big enough? Is that better?
It's too big. It's too big.
Like the screen you're sharing, it's like only a corner of the Word doc. It's not capturing, I think, the text that you are typing.
I wonder if that's because I have more than one Word document open. Let me just see.
Yeah, currently we see the task and directions corner.
Right. I think that it might be because of that. Let me unshare. Make sure there's no other. Close this. I've never had what just happened before. Have you? Has anyone had that?
Sometimes that happens to me when I Zoom, like when I zoom in on a document, I can see the whole thing, but my people who are looking at it on my screen can only see part of it.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let's see if it's going to work now. You see it all? Okay.
That's perfect.
Is it big enough for you to see?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to say we're going to start out with the formula that I showed you a minute ago. Code as information literacy. And you're just going to have to forgive me my typing mistakes. Any Okay. I guess I really can't stand that one. And I'm going to do the same thing down here. Okay, so Jess, what do you want to try to do here? Which one do you want to work on?
I think I agree that it's more information literacy and critical thinking.
Okay. Can you, which of the two definitions do you think you should change, should be revised?
I think information literacy.
Okay,
So I
okay.
would do something like
Nope.
code.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Code as information literacy and critical thinking. Any phrase that is related to research practices, such as, I'll keep a lot of the original, such as finding, using, and evaluating sources, identifying and analyzing meaning, interpretive and analytical skills. And then I think I would add something specific to this critical thinking component. So interpreting and analyzing skills and the development of thinking as a process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, there's kind of two comments I want to make about this. First of all, it's nice, you know, if we spend some time, we might break these things out as cases. So you might say, here we'd say, you know, such as, we might say, finding, using, and evaluating sources, identifying, analyzing meaning, interpretive and analytic skills, and the develop, and
So what you're asking us to do then is to be really robust about how we distinguish between the definition of a code, the code's case, and then examples that illustrate the definition and cases.
Well, we don't yet have any examples here, and you could put in examples. I don't know that this is saying anything different than the way Kiera wrote it. It's just, I think for a coder, this is easier to use. And of course, yeah, so I don't, but one of the things that this definition does is it has a sort of superordinate definition, anything related to research practices, which I think it was very useful. If you look down at this one, there is no superordinate definition. And I think that, you know, if I were Kiera, I would work on that because, you know, this is more of a, this is more the cases without a definition. So that's another reason maybe for breaking it out, because you do want to have a general definition and then, you know, the cases if need be. Jess, question or comment? Oh, where is she?
I'm
Oh, there
muted,
you are.
sorry. I think one thing that came up in our early discussion of class was also, and apologies for not remembering who said this explicitly, but whether it might be also helpful to break up the literacy skills and the critical thinking, because we saw that as kind of two distinctive codes that could also facilitate the confusion in some of these discrepancies.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right, sometimes, yeah, so one of the ways to deal with one of the revisions one can make is to break a code in two. Generally speaking, it goes the other way if you're trying to reduce confusions. Because if you find that two codes are so close together that, some people are picking one, some people are picking the other, maybe they should be combined. Usually you divide things, says here, it's literacy and critical thinking. You divide things based on your research question. In other words, if you have two things dumped into the same category, like seals and dogs, but you really want to see seals, because that's, you're trying to count the seals, that's a bad, you might want to break it out so you can just look at. So if Kara decides that, she really wants to distinguish critical thinking from information literacy and see them separately, see the patterns, then she would break it up. Kara, what do you think? Would you break it up?
Yeah, I would. And I think originally I did have them as separate codes. But I mean, Krista will remember this from when I took this class. I'm the kind of person who likes to have about 400,000 codes going at one time. So, and so because I was asked to provide a code book of like no more than 7 coding categories, I was definitely trying to like shoehorn things in. And I knew that there were some bad things happening, but I was like, it'll be educational for everyone. It's great. So,
okay.
But yeah, so like, Eduardo has mentioned in the chat feeling kind of icky about certain things being coded certain ways. And I totally see that. So yeah, I think I would want to split this one too. And there was also this whole other thing going on with the codes where I wanted there to be like a valence code where it was like a positive view of something or a negative view of something. But then I was running into issues with not wanting to apply multiple codes to the same segment, which is something I think I just consistently struggle with.
And we'll talk about that in just a minute, because it's certainly, well, maybe I should talk about it now. In general, I have found that codes that try to have a positive or negative valence are very unreliable. And that is because there's so many different ways to express positivity and negativity. And I have found that it's better to be descriptive with the codes and then say, well, of course, if they're doing X category, that's bad. Or, well, of course, if they're doing, Y category, that's good, because of the nature of the code, rather than to build in, to ask so you as researcher make the judgment about whether this is a good or bad thing, rather than your coder. Your coder is simply describing. Another thing that I think might get back to, if you basically don't have, if you can create a superordinate definition for something, that means it hangs together in some theoretical way, right? If you can't, if it's just a hodgepodge, that means that they're not hanging together and maybe they should be separate things, right? So, I really want to open your coding scheme here. There it is. Now, can you see that?
No, I think you have to do a new share.
I do, okay. Okay. Now you see it, right? I just have to figure out how to get to my. One of the things that I did as I was coding, or ended up doing, was distinguishing between writing and reading. So if it had something to do with reading, I called it information literacy and critical thinking. If it had to do with writing, I called it rhetorical knowledge. Now, obviously, I overused rhetorical knowledge compared to Kiera. So I'm not saying that's the right way to do it, but that's what I ended up doing. And part of the issue was that there's so many, these titles of codes are very long and complex. They really, rhetorical knowledge is clear. It's better to have coding, definitions that have simple names that are memorable to your coder, and also sort of meaningful in the sense of being a united thing, a single thing. The other thing that yes, the student agency code does is it uses the same term. It uses the term to define the term. So it's student agency if it's student agency. So you obviously want to try to avoid, I have found that I usually do that and then I have to fix it. So you want to have, find other words for communicating the term, the meaning of student agency. Okay. Stop sharing here. I am going to give you, I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. I want to give you a chance now to write coding definitions for Kiera that try to reduce the major disagreements that you and she had in your data. So begin by imagining a source of disagreement and then revise the definition. Oh, actually, I'm skipping this, but you can revise definitions, but you can add cases. You could, which we've already talked about, you could add examples. So if you think just an example would clarify what she meant by something, you can even add a note. So here, I added a note. This does not include the development of new practices, which should be coded as student agency. Okay, so if you really want to say you might be tending to go here, I don't want you to go here, go somewhere else, you can actually nudge them, with this kind of a note. When there's kind of ambiguity, sometimes I remember putting in a note that said, if you feel like it could be one or two different things, look at the main verb and go by what the main verb says, or something like that. So there are all kinds of sort of notes that you could add that would clarify the process. Okay, so I want you to use this form, code as whatever, any verbal that refers to, write your definition. If you want to add cases, pick one disagreement and revise, and I'll give you about, I don't know, we'll see. We'll start with 10 minutes and see how far you get. And be prepared to share your definitions when we come back. This is a good time also, since I didn't give you a break, to stand up and do what you need to do. Can you hear me? I think what we'll do is, there she is. All right, so let's share some of these definitions and maybe talk about what you were trying to accomplish with them. Does anybody want to volunteer to go first?
I will.
I was going to say anyone but Krista. No, I don't let you go first. You're too intimidating. Jess,
I can share. So I rewrote the definition.
you want to share your
for-
screen and show us what you've got?
Sure. Let's see.
I think you should be able to do that. Yeah.
So I rewrote the definition for rhetorical knowledge, and I wrote code as rhetorical knowledge, any clause that demonstrates knowledge, past or present, of traditional skills associated with the practice of writing. This may include awareness of fluctuating audiences, styles, and uses of writing, understanding of thesis, purpose, desired outcome of writing, familiarity with genre conventions and implementation, and comprehension of multimodal composing. And then I ran out of time before I could move on to examples.
So what disagreement were you trying to deal with that you found that you were doing?
Yeah, so one of the ones I noticed, I actually created like a little side code for myself in moments where there was calls to or mentions of writing as something more than, so like writing as like an end goal or like a way to like achieve something more than just an assignment, or sort of like more than rhetorical knowledge per se, but it was still hinting us like writing as this like tool. So wanting to create a little bit more mindfulness of like writing as this ideological tool, and then wanting to like include that in here as well, so that that could be more easily coded throughout.
Why did you say past or present in your definition?
I think just being mindful of our conversation earlier. I think a few moments throughout, and I think this kind of hints at what Kira was saying of the effect, like how we see skills in higher education versus how like high school sees skills, and thinking especially about like the 5-paragraph essay and literary analysis. Like those are still skills that I would have coded as rhetorical knowledge, but sometimes they were coded as like a lack of skills, because we see like the 5-paragraph essay or not writing from an I perspective as a lack or a failure, because that's something that we're trying to move students away from. But within the coding scheme itself, it does represent like a rhetorical knowledge of some type. So I just wanted to address that as well.
Okay. And why did you say traditional skills? Are there untraditional skills that you would put somewhere else?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. So one thing that I noticed was the use of the word Western and the conversations around like non-traditional students and international students. And I think I would want to refine my definition a little bit more to showcase that one isn't better than the other, but that our understanding of Western and like standard types of English and things like that are usually coded as traditional, and everything else is coded as sort of like outside of or deficient. So I think I would want to include that in there as well, of traditional in the sense of like Western and what we see in current higher education settings in the United States.
And so maybe if we scroll down and look at Kira's other coding categories, the non-Western, she might want to put in social, cultural, and linguistic knowledge. Is that what you're thinking? Yeah, okay. I don't know if that's of course what Kira wants to do, but that's one way to do it. So if you've got, you really want to do that, you want to say, put traditional here, put non-Western or non-traditional down here. If it's writing, so we see, some non-traditional way of writing, you don't want to put it in this one. Right now, there'd be a strong pull to put it here, but there's this little niggling traditional thing, right? And so you'd probably want to revise the social, cultural, and linguistic knowledge to either have a case, for including non-traditional or non-Western writing, or, something that would sort of say, yeah, it belongs here. And it's really important to, to realize when you put you know, a word like traditional in there, or just any kind of description, that's sort of saying, okay, there's a different kind of skill too, you know, that shouldn't go here. What do you think about calling this category rhetorical knowledge?
I can see why the appeal is to use rhetorical knowledge, because it can be sort of all encompassing in so many ways. But I think it does fall back into this question of like what we consider traditional, what we consider valuable, and like what we consider worthy of falling within a rhetorical category. So I think it is one of those things where that might just have to become part of the write-up, and in really kind of describing why each category was named and described as it was.
Right. I mean, that's something that I wondered about, is whether the category shouldn't really be called something about writing rather than rhetorical, because there's not too much rhetorical. There's a little bit. Some of these things are what I generally think of, you know, having to do with audience, generally, but some of them are not, and so it seems broader to me. But that's something for, you know, Kier to think about. All right. Great, thanks for sharing that. Maybe we can, who would like to show one now?
I can. It's not near as in-depth as Jess, but let me figure out. I have too many screens open. I will just share this screen. Dual monitor problems. Can you all see this here?
Yes, very nice and black. Look at that.
Yeah, it's also night mode, which is everything.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so the two that I was trying to, that I had the most.
Can you zoom in a little bit, Morgan? Sorry.
Absolutely.
It's hard to see. Okay. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. I was trying to distinguish between rhetorical knowledge and information literacy and critical thinking, because those are the two that I had the most disagreements with. And I think for me, I did a little bit here, like I kept the basis of the definition, but I added in a little bit here about refers to students' knowledge, and then also in relation to student writing. Because one thing we kind of talked about was like making the decision between here, like who we're applying these codes to, like whether it's like the student's rhetorical knowledge, or at times whether like the instructor's rhetorical knowledge could play into that. So I added that in there to clarify for myself. And then also in relation to student writing. So again, bringing the difference between sort of like reading and writing, trying to define that. And then I think the big thing for me was like going through and looking at where the disconnects were between what we were choosing, and then making the decision of like, okay, I think that like organization and construction of projects should fall under rhetorical knowledge versus critical thinking. And then
I remember that one, wondering, what do I do with this? Yeah.
The same thing kind of came up with technical skills or literacies, and I think this is when because it mentions like multimodal composing, but then I think it was, let me look back at my thing here, which one was bringing that up for me? I think it was, yeah, here, like social media and a degree of tech savvy, differences between various kinds of social media posts, how to engage with various technologies. And I ended up putting that under information literacy. Because I think I was thinking about literacy as like digital literacies here. So that's what I kind of like. So I think here, I was trying to think about where I wanted to place that sort of like, what is that a more technical skill? Is it a literacy? Should it be under rhetorical knowledge? So I think for me, a big thing was like adding these sort of like examples and deciding which one I like should put them in.
Yeah. So technical skills and literacy, the way you've done it now, it's pushed into rhetorical knowledge, even though it's not writing per se. It's but you know, that title, information literacy, is tugging at my heartstrings, and I'm thinking, oh, you know, that's where technical literacy, you know, technical literacy should go. So there
Right.
you're getting a little intuition conflict there.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, another thing that Kiera didn't do, but is often done, often needs to be done in a coding scheme, is to have a miscellaneous category. You know, so miscellaneous knowledge or other kinds of knowledge, which, you know, are stuff that she didn't really care about, but it's there, you know, it's in the data. So you got to find a category for it. So, you know, if she doesn't care about technical skills and maybe, you know, project knowledge, you know, doing projects for the purposes of this current research, you know, she could create a miscellaneous knowledge category. All right. I'm conscious of the time here. Is there one more person who wants to show? I don't think we have time to do everybody's, but something interesting.
Maybe it's just me left. I can share.
Okay, good.
There's only 3 of us.
You're right. I keep forgetting Kiera. I got to do it.
So mine, I mean, I think building off of, we can build off of some of the other conversations as well. So, I mean, initially what I started off doing was trying to just unpack that information literacies and critical thinking's definition. But then as I was making critical, yeah, but as I was making critical thinking into its own sort of definition, I was then questioning what is the distinction between what could be labeled as critical thinking and like rhetorical knowledge. So I kind of had to like work back and forth between the 3 of them as I clarified them. So as I like explain them here, I think it makes more sense to start first with information literacies. You'll see what I'm saying. So for information literacies, I put and changed it to just that aspect of knowledge of research practices, such as finding, using, and evaluating sources, practices. And then here is where I think, should I change? Did I put the mechanical bit here? Practice of developments related to skills, oh yeah, this is what I added. The practices or developments related to mechanical skills, such as searching the web or databases or using literacy skills to obtain or engage with information initially. And then just for my own sakes, I put some examples here, you know, kind of like we were discussing earlier in the chat, people had mentioned like there were some references where the instructors would talk about like, yeah, students like searching X or Y on the web and things like that. And I was like, yeah, that's information literacy. Like, and that's like such a specific and I think a great example that ties into like what I would think of as like a mechanical skill. And so maybe also, so I'm trying to like add to this information literacy. And then I worked my way towards like, well, what is critical thinking then as I try to move that into its own space. And for that, I put instructors suggest that students have or will develop some sense of reflexivity to question their writing or knowledge in a way that takes into consideration social forces or power. And for that, I said C segment like 72 for process orientation as critical thinking. And which at that point that started to make me think, well, how is like references to the writing process or writing as a process, should that be distinct from rhetorical knowledge? And I think that might be like, you know, that might, Kiera, that's ultimately going to be your decision at the end of it, because I could see how it could go both ways. But for me, I think about how like, at least like, I don't know, I don't think necessarily students are coming to the class often thinking of writing as a process. And so I can think about how them, you know, developing that idea is related to them developing critical thinking. And so when I then wanted to revisit rhetorical knowledge to kind of separate that out. And so far I just started adding in like surface knowledge of audience, purpose, genre, style, uses of writing and multimodal composing. Because originally it was just this, and as opposed to like this, but again, this kind of gets also into like more arbitrary lines. And then I was going to put in another like example.
Yeah. So those are, I mean, I would encourage you to try to use the, you know, code as rhetorical knowledge, surface knowledge. So, but some really good thinking that you're showing here. I think, you know, when you use a word like surface and surface knowledge, here the question is, does your do other people have the same intuitions about what means surface that you do? Now, that might be a good, you know, title, name of a code, and then with a careful definition of what's on the surface. You know, is it
It might even be something like initial instead.
Yeah, or yeah, I mean, there's various different ways I've seen
Yeah.
surface used. So, I mean, you know, but there's an opportunity to unpack that. I like the fact that you're trying to separate critical thinking from information literacy, but you're already running into issues, right? And we're talking, you know, and so, but what you're starting to do here is try to say, well, what do I want it to be? What do I want my code to mean? Which is the essential whole question, a whole goal, really, if you say, of this process. You know, of working with a second coder, looking at the disagreements and trying to unpack and decide what you mean. So thanks for, we can stop sharing now. Maybe, I think we have just a little bit of time left. So I'm gonna go back to the slides and kind of put this all in context now. So, you know, oops, I got too many windows open. So once you've done the coding and second coding and you've done revisions, you know, the question is what next? What would Pierre do next? What you do next? And you know, to finish reliability, she wants to get up to something like 80–85% agreement with a second coder. So you use that basic cycle we went through today of, you know, revise code, second code, a couple more times, and keep improving that coding scheme and reducing or getting it closer to matching intuitions. Usually the final cycle should be on new data with a new second coder, because obviously if you look at, if it use the same second coder, they get to, you want to show that the coding scheme, not that you've trained a second coder, you want to show that the coding scheme is saying what it needs to say. And then you report the final percentage of agreement. And then I said, just a brief hand wave at the kind of analysis that you can do if you've had data, is you can look at, I think of it as a patterns over space, like asking questions, do different participants or different contexts or different media make a difference? Do I see some categories being used much more? You know, I know that, for instance, that social cultural category that Kiera put in, are there certain kinds of teachers or certain kinds of schools where that's more common to have those assumptions? Do I see that pattern? So that's kind of patterns over space. And then near and dear to my heart are patterns over time, which is a little less relevant, I think, when you're looking at questionnaire data. But if you were using conversation data or online data that, and you looked at how the conversation evolved or how the classroom discourse evolved, you might say, okay, what were they talking about in week 1 versus what were they talking about in week 10, which is what this graph shows, or even within a single class or thread in an online discussion, you know, what's the basics? How does the structure change? Or if you're looking at, let's say, online postings about a certain political issue that evolved over time, what was being said, you know, in January versus what was being said in April, how did that conversation change? And various things, but there are all kinds of temporal dimensions that can be looked at over time. And of course, I want to make sure that you know you can go back into the book for all of this. So my expectations and hopes for you is that you're beginning to understand some of the challenges of coding reliably. Reliability is not, one person does not have sufficient intuitions, I firmly believe, to actually articulate what they mean. You know, it really helps to work with the second person. And I hope you have some basic understanding of the process that you can use to address those challenges. I'm hoping you have some confidence in your ability to undertake a project with coding, should you decide to do so. You know where to go for more resources. And of course, it's an invitation to keep in touch with me if you have questions or issues. I'm always happy to talk about those things. And I'm hoping you can see ways in which you might be able to use some aspects of coding in your own projects. So with that, I want to spend the last few minutes here taking your questions and stop sharing and talk. And I guess I'll go back to Krista, since I didn't let her talk and give her example. I'll let her ask her question.
I think I was just going to ask about how the segmenting, what was the
Right.
logic behind the segmenting?
Right. Segmenting is, to me, a really big issue, but segmenting is not meant to be interpretive. If it requires interpretation, it's coding. If it's rule bound, it's segment. Segmenting should be rule bound. I kind of use the rough and ready process for the purposes of working with Kiera, because I had to think of listening to what she was talking about. We looked at some of the data, what seemed to be the right size segment that would be coded only one way. There would be enough in the segment to do coding. It would be meaningful for her purposes, but not so much that she would want to put into two categories. So since she was looking at assumptions, I wanted to separate out. I can't even remember how I divided it, to tell you the truth. Now I'm thinking about, there are many ways that discourse can be divided. It can be divided very finely, which is what it was for Kiera, because it was assumptions. And of course, it's also questionnaire data tends to come in bursts, almost like idea units. And each one of those idea units that's probably the best way to describe how I divided Kiera's, could be an answer to the question, right? Whatever that questionnaire or what question was. If you're looking at continuous discourse, it can be by the clause, it can be by the T unit, which is main clause plus subordinate clauses. If you want to ask, and I'll give just, if you want to ask the question, what are they thinking about? You're asking about objects, in which case you're probably looking for nouns. Okay, but if you're asking the question, what are they doing? You're probably looking at clauses, because verbs are the doing things, right? So those are very fine refinements. Sometimes if you want to say, what kind of interaction was this? And you have a sort of category scheme for kinds of interactions. You can divide continuous conversation and segment it by interaction, which is a very much larger discourse unit than a clause or a phrase. There's a whole chapter on segmenting. There's many ways. There's no single way to divide it. When you find that you're having conflicts because you see one part of my segment wants to go this way in code, and another part of my unit wants to go that way in code, and you see that happening more than occasionally, that's a sign that you've chosen an inappropriate segmenting unit. So does that answer the question, Chris? Okay. Other questions or comments, larger issues? Morgan has her hand up.
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about a little bit when we were kind of like discussing this in our class beforehand was that some people were relying a little bit more on context of previous segments to code the segment that,
Yeah.
you know, the individual segment. So I kind of raised a question like, in what ways does coding or should coding rely on context versus just looking at that line by itself?
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about that earlier. I tend to try to focus on the language in the unit I'm coding, just because I found that if I don't put that discipline on myself, I miss things. You know, and I don't see what's really going on. I don't see what the language is actually saying. You know, and I have no problem with there being student agency, you know, if it's over and over again, they're still talking about, okay, they're still talking about the same thing. But I want to, you know, that one time they mentioned rhetorical knowledge. Well, I want to see that, you know, I don't want to just assume that this whole thing is about student agency if they're mentioning, you know, some other thing. So, I mean, part of that, you know, part of the answer to you is tied to segmenting. You want to have a segmenting unit that's the right size for catching what you're looking for. But I would say that my approach to coding very much looks at the language, which I think is entirely appropriate for our field. You know, whereas, you know, if I would say, you know, one of the distinctions between the approach I'm showing you and qualitative research is that we take the language seriously, right? It doesn't, you know, it means something when someone says it, this says this as opposed to that, even though maybe they seem similar. You know, and we want to, because so, you know, maybe that's the rhetorician in me. I know, does that answer your question, Morgan? What else? Oh, I know one thing we want to talk about. I think it was Kira said you were torn between, you kind of wanted to code it two different ways. Within a single coding scheme, you have to choose. You can't put things in two categories. But the impulse to want to code a second way is often the impulse to code to answer a different question. So you could code all your, you know, your data for what kind of assumption, what kind of knowledge is the teacher assuming here? And the second question might be, when was this knowledge expected to be enforced, or, you know, whatever the right way of saying that is, that past and present. So that would be two different coding schemes, two different coding columns, and coded separately. You can look at the relationship between them, and you can say, you know, what kinds of knowledge tend to be expected to be gained versus already present, you know, or something like that. But it's really two different questions. It's like looking at a dog. I always use dogs and cats in the book, but you know, you want to code the animals for color, but you also want to code them for, you know, wet and dry noses or something separately. So, you know, if you wanted to, you know, so it's not like you can't code things for more than one thing. It's just that means there's more than one coding scheme. I call them dimensions. There's more than one dimension to what you're coding. So
yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. Because I think when that was coming up the most for me is when I felt like my emotional sense or response to what students know was really different from what the other instructors assumed. So like very often, I think like the most hated thing in the whole data set is the 5-paragraph essay. I think that counts as prior knowledge that you can work with and build on, and it gives you something to talk about. A lot of people want to set it on fire. So I was like, how do I code that? And so, for example, like the 5-paragraph essay, I struggled sometimes with, well, I would count this as rhetorical knowledge because it is like a pattern of arrangement. But to these instructors, they see it as an inappropriate or inadequate thing. And so then I feel like I have to code it that way, but it felt gross to code it that way. So
yeah. So that positivity is a separate dimension from what kind of knowledge is it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, for some in some cases, you may not care what the instructor thinks about the paragraph, you know, whether it's positive or negative. You just may want to see, do they assume that, you know, is that one of the things they assume? Or you may say, you might want to go through and see if you can get a consistent, reliable way of categorizing, let's say, useful knowledge from less than useful knowledge, or, you know, knowledge to be built on versus knowledge that's blocked. You know, you can think about, I like, rather than just saying positive or negative attitude, try to think about what is its function, like utility, or you know, what are the, because the emotions are the positive and negative emotions are associated with some judgment about that's descriptive, right? I don't like it because it's blocking them from learning, or I don't like it because it can't be built on, or I do like it because I can build on it, or, you know, and so if you move that second dimension away from attitude and towards descriptive function or something, you'll probably be more successful. Time for, I think, one more question. Kira says, ooh, what's that mean? I have to, one of my regrets about teaching this way is I can never keep up with the chat, and I don't try more usually. Anything? Go ahead.
I just, in our last moments, wanted to send out a huge thank you from the very deepest depths of my heart for all of this help, because my mind has been blown in all the best ways. And I have so much more work to do with this coding scheme. Oh my God, but that's fine. That's why I have a year to work on it. Yeah, so thank you all of you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yes, and I want to thank you again for sharing the data, for you know, for pushing your own thoughts, and, you know, being willing to put it out there, and really helpful. And thank you all for coming today and joining with me. And as I said, I'm always, you know, where my email, you have my email, you know how to reach me. So if questions come up, or you get stuck, or something's not working, or something is working, let me know. Krista, any last things you want to say?
No, I want to echo everybody's thanks, and happy to talk with folks at some other point about how to tap into grant funds to pay for a second coder.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Cheryl.
You're welcome. And it's been a real pleasure to come back virtually.
Likewise, yeah. Oh, will you send me the recording when it finally downloads?
Oh, right, I've got to do that. Yes, and also don't forget, everybody, send Kira your coding definition revisions and your data showing agreements and disagreements.
Thank you.
All right, with that, I will get off and so I can get this recording.
Thank you.
Take care. Have
Thanks
a good
so
rest
much.
of the day.